Welcome to another episode of LivByte Podcast brought to you by Liventus. I'm your host, Danielle Dolloff. Today, we're going to talk about Magento e-commerce sites, specifically the Hyvä theme. We've done several implementations of this theme and are excited to share our findings. And I'm thrilled to welcome back a familiar voice to the show, Tim Doloff. Tim is an expert in Magento, and we're excited to have him return to share more of his insights. Welcome back, Tim.
Thanks for having me back. And this is a subject that I'm very passionate about. I'm very excited to talk about it.
Good. Let's get into it. So why don't we just start by explaining what a Magento theme is for everyone?
Well, first of all, Magento is an e-commerce platform. It's run on an open source system. So, this is a competitor for a lot of e-commerce platforms out in the marketplace right now. And just to quickly hit on why we work with Magento a lot is that it's a very flexible system. Because it's open source, we have full access to override any of the functionality. So it gives us a nice base for our e-commerce site to start from, but we can really customize it to be whatever a client needs. And every business has their own unique products, their own unique business flow, their own unique integrations. And Magento really gives us the tool to do those things. One of the other things that we can customize for a client, though, and have full flexibility over in a way that you don't with some of your off-the-shelf, your software as a service products like Shopify, for example. And that is the look and feel of the site. And that is related to what Magento calls a theme. So in other words, it's really what is the front end of the experience? What is the look and feel? What's the branding? What are the layouts on the pages look like? That's all built into a theme. Now, Magento traditionally has done theming in a unique way in that they have a base theme and they have a base, what they call a demo theme called Luma. And what these are is kind of like pre-built structures for the front end that tie into all the back-end functionality. So they're already tied into things like the product catalog and pulling product information for the product detail pages and several other components that you want showing on your front-end e-commerce site, but that allow the administrators to manage it on the back end of the site, manage it through the database, configure it through the database and things like that. So all the work that they do on the back end to build out the product catalog, to categorize the products and merchandise, to build out discounts, all that's tied into the front end theme through these, what we would call API calls. So that's all great. And it gives us a lot of flexibility because, you can start with their base theme and then you can really customize it to do whatever you want to. You can modify the flow and things like that. You can start with their demo theme called Luma, which is what a lot of companies base their theming off of. And that's got some extra functionality that's already built in. So maybe you don't have to build it from scratch. But in a lot of cases, you may want it to look and feel different than the Luma theme in a lot of ways. So you would modify that. There's also off-the-shelf themes, which is, I think a lot of businesses think of it as a cheap way to get live. So you can go to the Adobe Marketplace, for example, and shop for themes. And there are a lot of pre-built themes where people have essentially taken the Luma theme or the base theme. They've already modified it heavily to look and feel a certain way. And maybe they've added a bunch of extra options. Like maybe they've added, features that aren't built into the base theme. Like I'll just, for example, maybe the previously purchased by widget on the bottom of the theme, or special, front end homepage things like banner, the ways banner interact, or different, modules that kind of present data in different ways, like the way the blog information is presented on the front end. So there's a lot of off-the-shelf themes you can just purchase and then just install in Magento. So let me talk about the problems with both of those things. First of all, the Magento theme itself, because it's made to accept all that configuration that you can do in the back end and kind of update it, it's pretty bulky. It's got a lot of code that's built in there. A lot of it's JavaScript. It's a little, this is an older platform now. We're talking about Magento 2 came out in 2015. So we're talking 10-year-old at this point. And a lot of the functionality was built on the Magento 1 concept. And so they're even using some concepts that are even older than that. So this is not very lightweight. It's a heavier technology. It uses a lot of JavaScript code to decide what to display or how to display it based on the configurations that are presented. And what all that means is that you end up loading, basically there's a lot of bytes that are being loaded to the consumer's browser, a lot of information, because it's not only the images that you want to share. It's not only the colors, it's not only the fonts, but it's also all this code that has to decide how things get displayed based on the configuration and things like that. So that can slow down a site. And in the past, JavaScript was a pretty functional way to do a lot of this browser-based logic. But in modern times, there's new technology that's becoming faster. And your SEO, it cares more about the speed of your site. It cares more about how quickly things load and how you compare to other sites loading. So the Magento theme already, a little heavy, very hard to optimize much more than what it does out of the box. Then you take these third-party themes that you can purchase from the Adobe Marketplace or whatever, and they usually add in a lot more extra bloat because they're now trying to give you new configuration options. They're trying to say, hey, you don't have to customize anything, just plug it in and choose the options. But all of that adds more code, it adds more database calls, which oftentimes are not cached properly or optimized. That kind of essentially just make your pages load slower. And sometimes the backend calls they're doing are not performant. Sometimes they're not working with cache very well. So we really, really recommend staying away from those third-party themes, first of all. But we were kind of stuck with the Magento, kind of building custom themes off the Magento base theme. And that's how we typically work. Still not perfect, though. Well, let me just stop there. So before you get into the next question, does that answer your question on what a Magento theme is?
Yeah, and I think it lays out kind of the history really well and where the problem really came in. You talked about the SEO being utmost important in Google search, and the Google search prioritization is really around experience. So even if you don't care about Google search, you don't want your users or customers going to your website and experiencing slow load page speeds and stuff like that. They will likely bounce. So even if Google doesn't punish you, your customers probably will.
Yeah, and interesting that you called out experience, because it's not even just speed, because obviously your customers want to be able to interact with your site and get a quick response, especially as you're dealing with mobile devices and maybe you have a slower internet connection. People are expecting a fairly fast experience. But the other things that Google cares about from an experience perspective is something, for example, called content layout shift. What that means is, I'm sure you've had this before, where you go to a website, especially on your phone, and there's a choice. So you go to click the choice, and right before you click it, the page shifts and something else comes up there.
It's the worst.
And then you end up getting pushed out to another site or clicking on an ad or whatever. Believe it or not, that's usually not intentional, although there are some nefarious sites that do that intentionally. But that was a pretty common method of how pages would load, because essentially what they're trying to do is load the fastest stuff first, and then it would pop in, as an image loaded, it would then just drop it into the page or whatever. So that only creates a bad experience as the user's trying to navigate the page, but it also is confusing. A customer might be looking at something, say, this looks broken. Oh, then eventually the image loads or whatever. So content layout shift is something that Google cares about in their page rankings and SEO speeds, but consumers care about them as well. Accessibility is another thing that Google takes into account. And that is, how well can a sighted person use the site? How well can they navigate with keyboard navigation or voice navigation tools, et cetera? And content layout shift, accessibility, and speed were all things that weren't really front of mind when the Magento theming system was put in place, and is definitely not at top of mind for a lot of the third-party themes that are really just trying to give you a fast to market experience, but they're not really focused on some of these really key elements.
So yeah, we're facing, like you said, we didn't have good options to help our customers. So along comes Hyvä. So tell me what Hyvä is and kind of how it's helped our clients.
Sure. So first of all, Hyvä is pronounced, or is spelled Hyva.
That's a good call out.
Yeah. If you're gonna look for this, that's the way to spell it. Hyva. I think it's a Swedish word, but it's a Swedish company, I believe, that makes this. But so we did have one alternative to the Magento themes if we wanted to get that really performant experience and really accessible and Google friendly experience, and that was to create what we would call a headless site. So what a headless site is essentially it uses the backend, the catalog management, all of the tools that you use to administer your e-commerce solution. You could still use that stuff, but then we would build a completely custom front end that is built in the latest technologies. You could use something like React or Angular and build a super slick front end for the website. And then you have to tie in all the functionality. As developers, we would have to literally make API calls. So when the front end, the homepage is loading, if you want to pull up the menu options that are configured in Magento, we have to make API calls that pull those out, and we have to tie it into caching. And when you go to a product detail page, we now have to write API calls that have all those interactions happen. This is a great solution. It's probably still one of the best solutions, but it's very expensive because you're basically reinventing the wheel. Everything that was already built for it to handle the Magento front end, we're doing from scratch. Still a good option, and in some cases, it might still be the best fit for you. But what Hyvä did, which we really appreciate, is they kind of did that for us. They essentially already built a headless theme that has all those API calls already built. And so all of the normal e-commerce functionality that you would get from a Magento theme, you can get using the Hyvä theme, but they did it using a very lightweight, modern technology that only pulls the data it needs to. It doesn't check for a bunch of different configuration options. It doesn't load a bunch of front-end code. It's kind of processing and handling everything as quick as the fastest, lightweight, modern site can do it. They also looked at some of the important things that Google cares about, things like content layout shift and making sure that the best practices were already implemented into their theme, and things like accessibility to an extent as well. It's something we always want to pay close attention to, but Hyvä is doing it better than any existing Magento themes were doing it before. So what Hyvä does is essentially allows us to purchase a theme at a very reasonable price, very, very inexpensive. It's about €1,000 one-time cost, and replaces what building a lightweight headless theme would cost, which could be up to hundreds of thousands of dollars. So it's a very efficient way to do this, but it really replaces a lot of the bloat and a lot of the problems that the basic Magento theme brings in. Doesn't fix everything. It doesn't fix everything because we still are dependent on some of the Magento backend code to interact with. And so there are still, sometimes we can do this implementation and we can get great results, and we'll talk about that in a second, but there are still opportunities that maybe, there's opportunities for improvement that may need to be done with some of the existing backend core code that Magento handles, but it handles all that front end stuff in a much slicker, much lighter way, creates a much better user experience for the customers.
Nice. Sounds like it had been needed in the marketplace and, came in at the right time. So we've done several implementations of the Hyvä theme with our clients. What kind of results are you seeing? I know some have just gone live, but some have been live a little bit longer. So what are your kind of early findings?
Yeah, so great news is that we are getting the kind of speed results that we want. And, one of the tools that we use is a tool called Page Speed Insights. This is a Google tool. So you can just go to Google and type Page Speed Insights and you'll find this website. And you can type in your URL and it's going to give you some results really quickly. Now, the first set of results that you see, called the Core Web Vitals Assessment, those are based on a 28-day running, essentially like check. So it's pulling real customer data that's happened over the last 28 days and compiling it and scoring how your site's doing. And we have never seen a core Magento theme without heavy, real true heavy customization and for optimization that got a passing score on mobile or desktop. So Magento theming just doesn't provide that without a lot of custom work to try to override some of what it's doing and try to optimize for it. The Hyvä theme, on the other hand, with every site that we've actually used it on and tested on, gives us almost within days of launching it, and it's still using the 28-day running totals there. But within days of launching it, we're typically seeing passing scores, most importantly on mobile, which is always the toughest to hit, but of course on desktop as well. Like I said, this doesn't mean that it will fix every performance issue. There may still be things to dig into, and oftentimes we find this is related to backend code or previously written custom backend modules that are still slowing things down, but it immediately makes a huge difference, and that's great. So just to give you some examples, I'm looking at a site that was recently implemented with the Hyvä theme, and this is kind of out of the box Hyvä theme, meaning of course we did do some branding with it and CSS and styling and things like that, but we didn't have to really custom or like customize for optimization here. And then the other site that I'm looking at right now is a longer running site that we've been supporting for a long time. We've done some heavy customization just to try to optimize as much as possible, about the best we could with the Magento theme. And that one's had a lot of work put into it to try to get there. So the comparison, I'll give you a couple of key statistics. So the first statistic that Page Speed Insights look at is called largest contentful paint. So that means that, how much time does it take to get to the point where people can actually start to use the site? It's enough information, enough content on the site that's visible and available so that the customer can start using it. And on the site that we've had running for a long time and done a lot of extra optimization on, it's at about 2.3 seconds. which isn't terrible. It's actually still considered a passing score with Core Web Vitals. If we use this out of the box with Magento, it would not be passing. It'd be a little bit higher than that. But with Hyvä, pretty much out of the box, we're getting it down to 1.5 seconds. So you've got almost 40% improvement on that just with this one key statistic. The next one is cumulative layout shift, as I mentioned, which is the concept that how much of the page changes after the user started to load it. And again, we've done a lot of customization on this existing site, try to do the best we could with the tools that are out there. And it's sitting at a 0.1 content layout shift. So just barely misses passing. It's in a medium range, not terrible, but it could be improved. Hyvä right out of the box, a 0.03, meaning there's almost nothing there, and it is considered a passing score. A couple other scores like interaction to next paint and first contentful paint are both passing right out of the box with Hyvä, where they are still a little bit behind on a heavily optimized base Magento theme. And then the last one I'll call out really quickly here, which is probably the most important. This is time to first byte. Google really cares about this because this is from the second that your browser is going to start to actually receive information from your computer or from the server where it's giving you information. And on the existing theme with some heavy optimization and customization, 1.3 seconds for time to first byte. And then with the Hyvä theme, we're seeing about 0.6 seconds. So really huge improvements. And this, again, is just out of the box. There's even more opportunities for us to take care of as we get to work with it and optimize a little bit more for some of the back end code that it's still dependent on. But the front end part of it, really, really great improvements here.
I just want to underline for everyone listening, the amount of seconds you're talking about, 1.6 seconds, 0.6 seconds, and how tight the window is for Google to give you a passing grade. Like 5 seconds, you're just right out. You're a total fail. If you experience that, go to a website and start counting. And you realize how impatient you are and your expectation around the site loading and be able to interact with it is probably right in alignment with Google page insights, speed insights. The other thing to note is we've been doing this a while, and I've seen projects before this theme and how we really struggled and how much work we had to put in to get from, I don't know what you said, 1.6 to 0.6 or something like that, and how we would, with much more expense and much more custom work, it would take us to get there. So this is definitely a shortcut, and how important it is to obviously ranking on Google, but also to your customer experience. So those are remarkable results. And like you said, out of the box, day 1, 2, even when you've got the other 26 days averaging in, it's so dramatic that you're immediately going to passing, which we don't see. Usually we need those other slow days to fall off. But it was such a dramatic improvement. It starts to go to passing very fast. So that's pretty amazing.
Now, there's one other benefit of the Hyvä theme that I haven't really talked about, and that's the maintainability of it and cost to market. So Hyvä has its own, it's a new front end code. So developers that are working with it do have to learn to use it. They have to understand the functions that are available for us to work with and how you override styles and stuff like that. So it's got its own, it's not like it's simple, but one of the things we're trying to do is really make sure the customization is done on the front end and not done through, configurations in the admin. So we keep that high performance. But what we're finding is that the maintainability of the Hyvä theme, as far as when you need to customize it, when you want to implement it, when you need to make changes to it, are all a little bit easier than working with the core Magento theme. Meaning the first project we did, it probably took us about as long as a normal Magento theme project would, because we had some learning curve there. But after that, we're seeing about a 25 to 30% decrease in cost to actually implement that. And also we're finding that as we need to make additional changes once the site is launched, implementing them and testing those changes and things is just a little bit quicker turnaround. So just from a maintainability perspective, it's going to eventually reduce the cost to maintain the site and run the site. It may reduce the cost a little bit to launch the site. It depends on how much customization has to be done and how much the team that's working with has experience with it. But it's also just a cleaner code base. It's going to be less likely to introduce regression compression bugs when you're making changes to it and things like that. So another positive that we didn't know to expect when we started working with Hyvä, but one that we're pleasantly surprised to find a good experience with.
You talked about maintainability, and I know people are probably wondering about costs and stuff like that. We've had some experience, like I mentioned, implementing the Hyvä theme with several of our clients, and I just wanted to kind of talk people through if they're interested in the implementation of the Hyvä theme, what should they expect? Are there challenges they need to be aware of, or things they need to think about? As far as we've talked about a lot of benefits, I think that's been pretty clear, but just what should people expect out of a Hyvä implementation going through that process?
Well, if you're starting with a site from scratch, it's going to be pretty similar. I mean, from a project perspective, it's going to be pretty similar than if you were launching any new custom website, meaning that, of course, there's feedback. We always go through the process of mocking up what the site is going to look like, what each critical page of the site is going to look like, with a mobile first focus, typically, depending on your users. So there are some consumers or some B2B companies that still, when they're targeting business customers who are typically sitting at computers, they may be less focused on that mobile first, but that's one of the key things. So we'll go through the process of mocking up what that user experience looks like, whether we're working with your marketing team or working with our own UX designers that want to set the branding and kind of set the stage for what is your brand carrying through, how does the site look and feel. But we'll make sure that we've got that design clearly spelled out, so that as we're starting to implement the project, it's going to end up looking the same way that you have envisioned. And we get a chance to get feedback and changes to the vision before we start writing any code, because that's where it starts to get more expensive. After we have good mockups, mobile, desktop, we really know what the user flow and what the experience is going to be like and all of that stuff. Then we'll start the build out of it. It's typically, again, if this is a new project, any new custom e-commerce project, you can expect somewhere, starting at a 6-month turnaround on that. That's just realistic between the defining the requirements and understanding the integration points to your external systems and actually building this out and going through testing and everything, all this stuff, all the work that your team needs to do to get your product data entered or pulled in from other systems, and then getting through testing. That's kind of a good start. But it could go longer than that if it's a much heavier or more complex site. If you're talking about just improving your current Magento site, which is what we're finding a lot of clients looking to Hyvä to do right now, which is to try to finally solve some of these performance issues that they've been dealing with forever and try to get and stay competitive in this fast changing world of e-commerce. Hyvä theme is going to be something that you basically replace your existing site with. And this is a much quicker path. Now, we still wanted to find if there's any changes to your code look and feel. We still want to go through that mock-up process and make sure we've got that all clearly designed. But then we will usually start doing the actual development, pretty quickly on this. And we'll typically have a separate environment, like a development environment, where we can actually test our changes and see how they work on different devices and things like that. And we'll usually get it to a point where we feel like any particular page, maybe we start with the home page, has pretty well locked in. We feel confident that it looks and feels the way you're expecting it to. And we'll start to get it in front of you. We'll start to show you what it looks like, give you a chance to experience it on your own device, and make sure there aren't critical changes as we continue to implement this theme through the rest of the site. Ultimately, once we've got the theme all locked in, it's well tested, it's gone through a user acceptance testing process. We call that UAT. And the goal being that you and your business team members, your stakeholders at your business, have had a chance to kind of see how it works. Your customers, their buying process, their thought process, your customer service tools that they're used to using. We need you to kind of walk through this and say, yes, this meets the needs to do my job, and this meets my customers' needs for what they're trying to get out of my site. Once we've gotten to that point, then we can get ready for a launch. Now, rebuilding a Hyvä theme, still a fairly, it's a big project. It's not nothing, but you could get this done in 3 to 4 months potentially. So it can be a reasonably quick turnaround time where you're going from a site that's a bit sluggish, that you really are putting a lot of money into trying to do minor optimizations to get it as close as possible as you can. This is a very efficient way to get to a much improved performance and SEO and user experience than you would if you were doing it, if you were just trying to continue to pick away at the existing Magento theming, and you'll get better results here. So that's what you can kind of expect from a timeline as well as just the process that we go through with you.
Yeah, that's really helpful. I just wanted to kind of set some expectations that it's not like a week, but it's also not a year. So You've got 3 to 4 months, sometimes a little bit longer if the site's a bit more complex, for sure.
Yeah, there's one big thing I think I should mention here is that, we've been talking about the theme, which is what Magento considers pretty much everything from the minute that a customer, what their user experience looks and feels like from the minute they get to the homepage up until they get to the shopping cart. That's the theme. Although some of the theming and styles carry through, the shopping cart is really a different module. It's a different component of Magento. The Hyvä theme itself doesn't replace your Magento checkout. And that's a shame because Magento actually has kind of a clunky checkout process as well and limited flexibility in the flow. The good news is Hyvä actually makes a checkout solution as well that does replace the front end experience in the checkout. So when you're talking about complexity, the question is, how unique is your checkout? Is it very similar to the out of the box Magento experience? Is it a very standard checkout? Great. We can pretty much plug this Hyvä checkout in and it's going to start working very quickly. But we have some customers that's where most of the complexity in their site comes from is the checkout. Do they have unique options or tools for B2B customers? Do they have unique upselling features for customers as they get through the checkout process? Do they have pickup in store features? Do they have home delivery features? Do they have unique availability based on store hours, things like that? So there's a lot of things that we may have had to customize in a standard Magento checkout. Well, we're going to have to rebuild all that stuff in the Hyvä checkout, so you can get that improved performance and maintainability in the checkout as well. But depending on the complexity, that could add a lot of complexity. And we've just been through one of the more complex projects I've ever seen in e-commerce from a checkout perspective and implemented with the Hyvä checkout. So not a small project, but a huge improvement to their current experience and a very positive overall shift.
Yeah, that's good to provide that additional information. Just looking ahead on Hyvä, what do you see with this theme? We're really excited about it. Had several implementations in it and are seeing the results. Kind of looking forward, where do you expect to see the Hyvä theme, impacting e-commerce or any other thoughts about it as we kind of...
Well, I think first I would say that the Hyvä theme has really revitalized Magento as a competitive product because it was starting to really lose ground against some of the software solution products that had more control over the optimization and the performance of the sites. And so Magento just couldn't keep up with its out of the box theme. Obviously, Magento offers a lot of flexibility that those software as a service solutions don't. And so people had to make a trade-off. Do I want a fast site or do I want a flexible site? Well, the Hyvä theme allows us to give both of those things. We now can present a fast site, a great user experience, meeting modern expectations for how quickly you can navigate a site on a mobile device, as well as the flexibility to do whatever you want your site to do and all of that. So that's amazing. It's really, I think, going to keep Magento, viable for new site build outs and also allow existing customers who've got this Magento solution they've been customizing and working with and maintaining for years that they can't move away from easily. Now you can actually drastically improve it with this step. The other great news is that Hyvä is very actively supporting these products. It's become very popular. It's growing rapidly, and they're getting the funds to keep reinvesting in this. And we're seeing this right away. Like, even though we just did this huge implementation, great implementation to improve a checkout flow, there are some elements of the way the Hyvä theme worked that was trying to get as fast as possible that interrupted some of the specifics of what we wanted to do to the flow. They had this auto loading feature in there. Well, they just announced a new release where they are taking the auto loading out because they found that it wasn't perfectly adapted to some circumstances. That's great. It's so great to see that a problem that we ran into and had to work around, they understand, they're listening to that being an issue and they're solving it. They're also constantly maintaining it, looking for security risks or security issues that are coming into the code are being identified, and also keeping it up to date to keep up with any additional features that are being added to the Magento open source platform as well as the Adobe Commerce platform. So they're adapting with those tools. So we really think that Hyvä is going to be a core piece of the Magento landscape to come. And in fact, I would probably not recommend anyone launch a new site without it. That should just be your default. If you're going to launch a new Magento or Adobe Commerce site, Hyvä should be the theme that you start with. So I think it's an exciting space to be. I've been working with Magento since 2007, I think, which was version maybe 1.3. And this is the most exciting thing to come to the Magento infrastructure. Definitely since Magento 2 got released, but I would say probably even more impactful than Magento 2 was at the time back in 2015.
Oh, that's amazing. And I know our clients are certainly appreciating the strong results. So Tim, this has been such an insightful conversation. Thank you for breaking down everything about the Hyvä theme for us. Again, spelled Hyva. Thanks for that clarity. If you're looking it up, you might not think to spell it that way. To our listeners, thank you for tuning in. If you're considering Hyvä for your Magento store or have any questions, feel free to reach out to us at liventus.com. Don't forget to subscribe to the LivByte Podcast for more episodes like this one. Until next time, take care and stay innovative.
Take care.